I've come out of my footlocker to call to your attention a little-known aspect of military history, the military family. Military history has privileged the exploits of men on the field of battle, while neglecting the roles of military dependents, military spouses and children, who comprise, along with their spouse, parent, soldier, the military family. Tonight, I offer you, the audience, a single account of this marginalized history of the military family. My history began in June 1948, when my Uncle Sam served my dad, who was living in rural North Carolina at the time, with a draft notice. 1 month later, my dad enlisted in the United States Air Force, signing just a 3-year contract and becoming an active duty airman. 2 years later, the Korean War began. As a consequence, my Uncle Sam pushed new legislation through Congress called Public Law Number 51, which extended the enlistments of all active duty military personnel. This meant that my dad, who only had a few months left in that original 3-year contract, would not be able to leave the Air Force when his contract ended in July 1951. Stationed at Offutt Air Force Base near Omaha, Nebraska, and stuck in the Air Force for an additional 3 years, my dad married my mom in February 1952, and in January 1953, I was born in a military hospital, not as a civilian and not as a member of the public, but as a military dependent in a military family, where a realm of men in uniform, a system of authority that demanded obedience and conformity, and a learned helplessness would shape my future. You know, in a sense, I was an accidental military dependent. August 2024, San Francisco Fringe Festival, San Francisco, California. I am 71 years old. For my first 15 and a half years, I performed primarily on stages located on property owned or paid for by the federal government, on or near U.S. military bases, mostly Air Force bases, where I learned to play my role as a military dependent. Years later, I learned, as a civilian adult, that military dependents like me had a history that went back hundreds of years. Then we were called camp followers. Camp followers were the spouses and children who followed their spouse, parent, soldier from one location to another, from one camp to another. Now, like those historic camp followers, my military family just didn't follow my dad. We played a role in securing our needs. In particular, cooking, cleaning, laundering, shining shoes, scrubbing spotless metal garbage cans, offering my dad emotional and psychological support, and eventually providing additional income for my military family. According to my mom, there were no family relatives living anywhere nearby wherever we were camped to help us get out of a jam. My dad said, no, there's a relative living nearby, and that was my Uncle Sam. When my dad was away from us, his military family, either stationed overseas or on temporary duty at some other Air Force base, there were times when we needed a helping hand to get out of a jam, but our Uncle Sam was not available. In fact, his support rarely materialized. But no matter where we were camped, when my dad came home, he came home to us, his military family, where a less visible drama was played out. May 1959, Kelly Air Force Base, Kelly Homes, San Antonio, Texas. I am 6 years and 4 months old. I didn't see my mom leave our military family facility. When I did notice her, she was standing at the end of the driveway, but she wasn't clothed in the general issue. She was wearing a long dress with low-cut black shoes with white socks up to her ankles. She had 2 pieces of luggage, one resting at the end of the driveway, the other in her right hand. On that piece of luggage at the end of the driveway was a pink jacket. I was a little confused. I thought my mom was ironing my dad's Air Force shirts that morning. Mom, hey Mom, what's going on? I'm going back to Omaha for a while. Oh yeah, how you gonna get there? I'm waiting for a taxi to take me to the bus station. She lets out a deep sigh. I can no longer live in third-rate housing with no screens on the windows, eat only military food from boxes, cartons, or cans, never go anywhere or never visit anyone. I really wish there was someone nearby that I could talk to, but I don't even know any of the neighbors. And I have no friends or family here except for your dad, and he's not always interested. Well, Mom, what about our Uncle Sam? When you need him, he doesn't need you. While we're standing, ill at ease, my dad moves through the main gate and moves close to my mom. He and I exchange a two-finger salute. This morning, he is wearing an Air Force khaki uniform. His starched and ironed shirt extends out from his thin chest as if it's a hardened shell. His garrison cap is pointed directly at my mom. But no aspect of his Air Force uniform projects the presence of military protocol than the technical sergeant stripes on his sleeves. From them, a pulsating glow envelops the three of us, encoding radio silence and signaling enhanced discipline. My mom has no rank as a military spouse. Without a word spoken, we follow my dad back into our military family facility. July 1967, Ent Air Force Base, Colorado Springs, Colorado. I'm 14 and a half years old. By now, I knew that my dad worked for the Air Force in supply. Like the word supply in supply lines? Simply, he moved bulk material along established routes to Air Force installations across the country. My military family was also connected to those same Air Force supply lines. Due to my dad's limited salary, we shopped almost exclusively at two Air Force institutions: the commissary, the Air Force's imitation of a grocery store, and the Post Exchange, the Air Force's imitation of a department store. By 1966, with my mom working full-time, with additional income from my job as a paperboy, and my dad's top secret gambling winnings from the bowling alley, our cash flow increased, such that we were able to shop occasionally at civilian retail outlets. And to my complete surprise, Mom and Dad put a down payment on a small house in the civilian sector. In 1966, there was a plan in play I knew nothing about. My dad had decided to stay in Colorado Springs when he retired from the Air Force. According to my brother, he had made some arrangement with my Uncle Sam that Ent Air Force Base would be his final duty station. And when he retired in October of 1968, we would all be in Colorado Springs together, and my military family would be a thing of the past. However, in July 1967, there was another plan in play I knew nothing about. My Uncle Sam had gotten on the phone, called my dad, and ordered him to report to Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base, Saigon, South Vietnam. My dad never explicitly told me It was going to the war in South Vietnam. My mom did. She also told me that my dad believed he would be killed in that war, and we would have to move closer to his family relatives in rural North Carolina. There was one thing unusual about this pending relocation. The reaction of my younger brother and my older sister. They told my dad to his face they weren't going to move. I knew their rebellion was foolish. But I appreciated the fact that they spoke up, because I didn't do that anymore. I knew there was no use to do so. Mom repeatedly reassured me that in North Carolina, I would make new friends. I would go to a good school. That the Air Force and Uncle Sam, they would help us find a place to live. And we'd be closer to my dad's relatives. Yeah, we'd be closer to my dad's relatives. But I had done this Air Force moving thing before, and I knew nothing else would be true. My mom was just sugarcoating the fact that when Uncle Sam made a decision, it was final, and there was nothing we could do about it. April 1964, Truax Air Force Base, Cape Hart Military Family Housing, Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. I am 11 years and 3 months old. In a civilian school in the 5th grade, a civilian student that I didn't know well called me a military brat. It was the first time I'd heard of that label, and I didn't quite understand what it meant. My military family didn't even use that kind of language. I generally didn't let on to civilian students I didn't know very well my status as a military dependent. They just didn't get it at that age. But in this case, it must have been my military-style haircut or my military-style Oxford shoes that gave me away. I didn't know at the time, but these were the standard features of the military subculture for the male military dependent. Now, don't put it past my Uncle Sam to try to elevate this ridiculous situation into a fashion statement. Well, soon enough, I looked up the word brat in a dictionary. The word implied a spoiled, arrogant, and unruly child. What? Me? In 1964? A spoiled, arrogant, and unruly child? It was impossible. I was growing up in a welfare for warfare military family. Besides, I was the firstborn son of a career Air Force NCO. I didn't get away with anything. later as a civilian adult, the meaning and usefulness of the label military brat eventually became clear. Public relations. The label disguised the fact that I was growing up in a military nuclear family in the nuclear age, where we struggled to cope, mostly on our own, with social, psychological, and economic challenges that my Uncle Sam didn't want scrutinized by mindful civilians. And you thought my Uncle Sam only used public relations to justify U.S. military intervention in foreign countries. December 1960, Donaldson Air Force Base, Piedmont, South Carolina. I'm almost 8 years old. My dad, my parent airman, departed early one morning to catch a military transport flight to Osan Air Force Base in Seoul, South Korea. Once again, my Uncle Sam had gotten on the phone, called my dad, and ordered him to this new duty station. My dad would be away from us on this tour of duty for 13 months. While he was away, the rest of us would stay in our military family facility in Piedmont and wait for him to come home. But without his commanding presence, it meant that Mom and I would have to access Donaldson Air Force Base to enter the commissary for our food supplies and the post-exchange for whatever else might be available that day for purchase. But there was another issue. Mom and I didn't have the proper military photo ID to enter the base on our own. So we had to have our photos taken. And a week later, when my photo came back, I took a look at it. I saw that there was an odd-shaped patch of hair sticking out of the left side of my head. But then I understood. That's how I was connected to the Jesus. You've never heard of the Jesus? My Uncle Sam has an acronym for everything connected to the Air Force, including the guidance system, a secret wireless communications network constructed by the Air Force in the 1950s. The acronym for the guidance system is spelled GSYS and is pronounced Jesus. Now you know. And I knew that my military photo ID was evidence of my link to that secret network. Well, soon enough, Mom and I needed to go to Donaldson, to the commissary, to secure our groceries. Mom drove the car to the main gate at Donaldson Air Force Base. And when it was my turn, I handed my military ID to the military police officer on duty. He looked at my ID, then he looked at me. He looked at my ID again, then he looked at me again. Handing my photo ID back to me, he said, "Son, that's what you're gonna look like when you're dead. And you can thank your Uncle Sam for that." With that, it's time for me to return to my footlocker. Since this is my last, thank you so much, and thank you for listening to me. I really appreciate it. This is my last performance at the Fringe, so I have lots of people to thank. First, my producer, Jamila, my most important critic, gave me lots of good ideas on how to make this thing happen. My friends who are here, Sue, Mike, Nancy, and Rita. And then everyone connected to this theater, Christina, Beth, and Curtis, and Aisha outside, and Stuart. Because remember, it's the people who run the stuff, that's how things happen, right? So thank you all so much.